The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, good evening, and hello to everybody. Welcome to How to Protect Your Project from Start to Finish. This is part one, the overview, and it is first in a four-part series. This is a Clear on Black webcast, and I'm Carl Ross, President and CEO here at Clear on Black. We are a bespoke interior architectural design firm specializing in upscale and luxury hotels and resorts. We help owners, operators, and developers gain dominating market presence and greater profitability by unlocking the hidden potential of their properties. Clear on Black webcasts cover hospitality design projects that affect owners, operators, developers, architects, purchasing agents, and other allied hospitality team members. I and the occasional guest expert speak for about 30 minutes and then take your questions for a few minutes after. So this series kind of came about because of it's kind of a bit of a legacy. I've been working on in this industry for over 3 decades, and in that tenure, I've seen some really great projects with some really fantastic project teams, and I've seen some that are not so good. So one of the things that we're going to go through and we're going to talk about is what's going to be best practices. And in that 3 decades, it just always struck me as something that, if we could only have all these great characteristics rolled up into one team, into one project, and propel that forward from owner to owner, from project to project. And that's kind of what the basis of this entire thing was. So this is a 4-part series. This is the first one, and it's an overview. So in this broadcast, we're going to let's cover why protect your project and from what. We're going to have project philosophy. We're going to talk about that, what that is, and what that does for you having one. Then we have project decision-making protocol, what that is and how to work with it. And we're also going to talk about owner leadership. So when we look at what we're doing here and why protect your project, on this broadcast, we have a virtual project team. We have owners, we've got operators, we have developers, architects, landscape architects, general contractors, tradesmen, and also manufacturers and fabricators. So we really have a very diverse and quite compact. It's a virtual team. So I'm speaking to everybody here, and we're going to cover some things in here that hopefully are going to make your projects run smoother and things that are going to allow you to be more effective in what you do. So first thing is, what is protection? Well, protection is defined by whom? For me, I always think of protection coming from the interior design side, but then I look at what architects have to deal with, what owners and operators have to deal with, what manufacturers and fabricators have to deal with. So I think that there's probably a general understanding shared amongst us, but yet we would have our own focus on it based on our discipline, based on our concerns. So really what I want to look at also is, what do you risk by not being protected? Well, risk comes in all shapes and sizes. We've got lost revenue, we got blown budgets, we have schedule overruns, we've got far more serious things. There can be legal ramifications, there can be all kinds of things that go wrong. So certainly I'm not an attorney, I'm not a financial advisor. Everybody on this call has got those people in their camp. You have your counsel, and that's where you get that information. But really, what I want to talk about is, what steps can you take to achieve the desired protection for you and or your company? So this is about mitigating risk, and it's, for the most part, stacking the odds in your favor. So let's look at first step. Okay. In my early days, I thought all projects were pretty much the same. They were, here's a renovation, here's a new construction, and this is a big one, this is a small one. But for the most part, they all seemed the same. But what started to dawn on me as I got a little long in the tooth is that they weren't all the same, and there were very distinct differences. And I started to try and figure out how to control the projects as I got into project management, and as an owner, it very much became a concern because now I was in a position of responsibility, having to perform on a lot of different stages in a lot of different ways. So I started looking at, all right, what are those factors? What are those things that really, either swing a project to the positive or pull it to a negative? So what I finally came up with is these three factors: budget, quality, and time. And I call those the big three. Now, obviously, budget jobs are ones that have usually tight budgets. Rarely do you ever see a job where they say spend everything you possibly can. Then there's quality. Well, quality is usually not how poor the quality can be, but it's a focus on how good the quality can be. Quality of all kinds of things, from the FF&E, from the physical built spaces. And then, of course, there's time. Well, time constraints, rarely do you have an instance where somebody says, take all the time in the world, it doesn't matter, there's no schedule. So the interplay between these starts to become really interesting because as one piece moves and one thing becomes more dominant, one thing rears its head, all of a sudden everything else starts to shift in response to it. So these aren't, I wouldn't consider these as three static pieces, but rather three very much dynamic pieces. So once you know what they are and what they do and how they behave, you're going to be far better in a position to be able to have a smooth running project and one that is predictable. It'll start to behave a little bit. So let's take a look at the big three and create what I'm calling a hierarchy. So let's say determining the budget. Okay, budget is primary focus. That is going to be a big deal. It's got to be our number one thing, and then we decide after that, okay, so what's after that? Well, the thing about the hierarchy is you don't have to do this, but gosh, it's so much better if you do, because if you pick the first thing, then you pick the second thing that's most important, then the third thing automatically falls into place. So in the instance of budget being a top factor here, we had a project we were brought in on, and it was designed by another designer several years ago, and it was done under a very, very tight time frame, budget. And so this budget yielded, it forced the purchasing agent to make some decisions as far as who the fabricators and manufacturers were for the FF&E, and this was a full guest room renovation of a hotel. Well, what happened was, yep, they met the budget, but in order to do that, there were a lot of concessions. Some of them were known, some of them were not known. They had prototypes, they had certain things done. Yep, looks great, it's all good. Well, we're now 2 years down the road in what should be a 12-year case good life cycle, and we've got failures across the board. It is soft goods, it's case goods, it's light fixtures, it's decorative lighting, it is drapery. So what looked to be that great savings up front and that great dial down on let's get it really cheap, now they're compressing a 12-year schedule into 2 years, and there really isn't any savings. So if you're an owner and you are a fix and flip kind of group, this works great. It's a short-term solution. You can put lipstick on a pig and get it out the door, and it'll be just fine. And that will ultimately be somebody else's problem. But if you're a company or you are somebody that basically holds your assets, then and you're going to have that for a longer time, then it's maybe not the most prudent way. So as we go through all of the big three, something to consider is like the pluses and minuses. There's no judgment on any of these. Really, what I'm trying to do is show that becoming aware of what the ramifications, what the risks are, and what the possible rewards are gives you far better position to be able to make decisions informed and train your team, train your project managers, train your entire project team how this is going to impact them. Okay, so the next factor is, let's call it, this one is time. So if time is focus, really, really extraordinarily tight time frames. Okay, so what are the factors that happens here? When time becomes a factor, what happens to budget and what happens to quality? Well, to give you another real life example, okay, we had a large suites renovation that had to be done in an extremely tight time frame. Well, okay, we got clear marching orders with the owner. We all agreed that certain factors had to be met. Number one is time. Budget, not so much, but here's what happened. All of a sudden now we're relegated to, okay, we have to have basically in-stock items. We have limited resources. We are essentially buying off of showroom floors with the inability to make any custom adjustments or changes. And that for us in the upscale and luxury market is a big, big deal, because our clients come to us because they want a tailored look. They want a special look. There are unique elements that we need to bring out. There's detailing that we want to have. Well, when you're buying in stock with limited resources, you just simply cannot make those kinds of changes. It's what they have in stock. So there's another factor of this, is that if you're buying off the showroom floor and it is residential grade product, by virtue of that, it's not commercial grade product. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, fire codes and double rubs come to mind right off. If a fire breaks out and you don't have coverage because of your flame spread, and you've met all of the normal hospitality considerations that we do in commercial hospitality, you're really, really going to be in it's some serious hot water. I know of a hotel that was fully furnished with 100% residential grade furniture. It was overscaled. It was oddly proportioned, and it wasn't tailored, and yet it's trying to play in a market that is very much luxury, and it simply isn't meeting the standard. So pluses and minuses, this understanding that if time is the serious factor here, then yeah, this is okay for an immediate solution similar to the budget issue. But the minuses are lost uniqueness, it's not as special, and it may not resonate with the guests. And at the upscale and luxury market level, I think that guests have an expectation, and it's our job as designers and project team members to deliver on that promise. And it comes in very subtle ways. So third factor is quality. Well, boy, quality. Everybody wants it to be wonderful. Everybody wants to spend good money and get great projects and have great detailing and have wonderful features and most expensive fabrics. Well, that scares the bejesus out of most owners, because they assume that everything is going to be expensive. And if you're doing a palace, yeah, it probably should be. But if you're not, and most of us don't, then you've got, I believe, that designing responsibly, you need to strike a balance. You need to create the look, appeal, and feel of high quality and luxury without necessarily making everything equally balanced across that is, all that money. So what that means is this is a change of focus. This is, I think, largely, it is planning up front. And guess what? That planning is free. That doesn't cost anybody anything. It is a little bit of head time with the right people figuring out what is we're going to do. What is it we're going to plan for? How do we evolve this so that we get the most quality that we possibly can? But then, how do we then execute that? Well, the execution comes out of the quality of the documentation. And that is project team wide. That is from the architect, the ID, as well as all the subconsultants, all those trades. So it's on the architectural side, it's creating a package involving the general contractor that is going to be something that he has seen before. He has been instrumental in its evolution. There are no surprises. And when he takes that to the street, he has confidence that he knows what's going to happen with it and how to work with it. Well, that quality documentation also hands into the FF&E, because if we're designing specialty pieces, we're doing amazing detailing and stitching and all kinds of custom light fixtures and things like that. Quality of the documentation has to be there too. You can't ask somebody to fabricate a beautiful chandelier or something that is off of a lame fixture cut that you caught off of Pinterest. So an example of this is we did a project in South Florida that was straight out of the gate, wanted to be very, very high quality. Well, so the owner said, okay, we need to plan this. It was a really, really smart move, because what he did was he knew that the construction cycle and the planning cycle were going to be a little bit long. So what did he do with that time? Well, he started doing early buyouts on the materials, on the plumbing, on the fixtures, and the GC light fixtures. So he was able to warehouse that for a year and a half on an early buyout, and he saved over $2 million. Well, what it also gave us is an overall project that the general contractor was bought in, the ID team, the architect, all the sub-trades, everybody was rowing in the same direction because they all understood from the owner what it was going to be from the outset. Well, 8 years later, TripAdvisor says that is an absolute leader in the market. It is wearing very well from an operational standpoint because, yeah, we had operational input with the operator. We knew what things were going to wow people, and yet we didn't want them to wear out either. So let's go back and summarize the big three hierarchy. So the first one, you need to agree on your hierarchy and express it to your project team early and often. Now, I'm speaking mostly to the owners and the operators on this call. You all are in the driver's seat. You determine what is going on, and it is, whether it's a one person or it is your entire executive team, if you establish this hierarchy and express it to your team early and often, then as new consultants are brought on board, as sub-trades are brought on board, as new elements are brought on board, it becomes the project mantra. It becomes what the marching orders for the entire project are. Second part, understand that it could change should issues arise, but overall, that hierarchy should remain as constant as possible. So the caveat is this: nobody but the owner can reshuffle the deck. Nobody has the authorization, nobody has the control, and that is strictly an ownership role that they get to do. So that constant settles the team, and they understand. Now, should some outside force act on it, if asbestos gets discovered or some found object, there's some consideration, then yeah, the owner can make that change, but nobody else. Third thing, knowing the hierarchy will assist you in hiring your consultants appropriately. And I started thinking about this. It's not so much just even the consultants, because sure, certain people in certain firms on the design side are geared to, they're better at budget. Well, some people are better at speed. It's time, it's a factor. Well, we already know that if budget's a factor or time's a factor, the other things are going to move. Well, the same thing with quality. So some firms are better at quality. Well, same thing goes for manufacturers and fabricators. Some people, they don't do large quantities. Some people do one-offs much better than big bulk orders. And some people are better at quality. Some people are better at time, and some people are better at the other pieces. So really what we want to do then is, now we're going to go to the second step of this project process, which is the project decision-making protocol. So what the heck is that? Well, it's subtle, it's sly, it requires a little bit of courage, some insight, and a little bit of humility and integrity. So first thing is, identify the decision maker on the client and operations side, and identify who the final decision maker will be. Identify the one. And it's not designed by committee. I think probably everybody on this call has seen design by committee as a recipe for slow-moving disaster. It's what happens is the group is not managed, decisions roll around, nothing gets done, and ultimately the time runs out, and you're left with, well, I guess since we have nothing left, we have to go with whatever we think the least horrible option is. Well, that's great, but it's honorable not to step on toes, but it really, in the long run, it hurts the team. So identifying the key decision maker at the outset and not wavering from that is super, super important. The other factor in this is that establish a decision-making protocol in terms of make sure that the decision makers and the stakeholders give 100% participation. If a decision maker, if the one can't be present, identify the second who will be able to step in and keep the project pace. It is said in the world of sports that the team that dictates the pace dictates the game. I think that metaphor applies to our industry as well, because if you can keep a pace, you can accomplish amazing things. You can mobilize teams, you can create projects that shouldn't have been able to be done, and yet they do. So I think controlling pace is a big deal. Well, there's a couple of things that can fly in the face of that. And one is the mystery stakeholder. Well, mystery stakeholders show up unannounced. They show up uninvited. They show up anonymously. And we had a particular experience on a room renovation where it was a model room review and a mystery guest showed up. Only one person knew who it was, he. And as that person began to speak, it completely derailed what was otherwise a completely successful model room review to the tune of 3 hours of time. And we had to go back and retool, and it spent 3 weeks taking things off of track. Well, the ownership stepped in and expunged that effort, and we were happily and merrily on our way again. But mystery stakeholders are not a good thing. It's best to deal with them quickly and decisively. So identifying number two, that second stand-in person. This is the humility and the integrity part. As an owner or as a decider, your team is depending on you to make decisions. And they will respect it if you do, and they'll know it if you don't. And there are aspects to this that there's certain behaviors that just some things work and some things don't. We had an opportunity come up a number of years ago to do a promo presentation for a large renovation project here in LA. And so we went in, we had beautiful boards, we had this amazing presentation. It was fantastic. There were 7 executives from this ownership group. And as we began to present, all of a sudden one would get up and leave, come back, another one would get up and leave, and it was this rotating cycle of absentee clients. Well, at the end of the presentation, our 1 hour was up and done. Not one single person that we were presenting to in that key audience had seen the entire thing all the way through. Well, there was no continuity. There was no knowledge. There was no basis of understanding of the design. There was no knowledge really of what we were doing except fragmented pieces. Well, the good news is we didn't get the project. And what that told me a lot about that company is their commitment level and their integrity level. And that was for us a pretty decisive moment. So when we look at the pieces of that, we're going to jump into what is in the next step, owner leadership. Now, owner leadership, this is a soft subject. It's a little bit of a rare topic, and as I look across the spectrum of projects that we've been involved with and the variety of different owners and different leaders, and I look at what are the characteristics, like what do the top people do? What are those elements that they do? And yeah, there's tons of books about it, and you see it, and you can plow through Amazon and you can find that stuff. But in real live application, things that touch us as designers, touch you as project team members. Well, first one is, there's probably 3 of these, and this is the first one. All right, these owners, these leaders, they are intellectually engaged in the project process, yet they resist the temptation to micromanage. They're not there to second guess. They're not there to trump somebody else. But really what they do is they trust the professional to do the professional's job. Implicit in this, to me, is understanding who you're hiring beforehand. And this goes back to a little bit of the element of, who's best suited for what kind of job. And that goes back into the quality and the hierarchy of the big 3. So when we look at the first one, they're intellectually engaged in the process, and yet they resist the temptation to micromanage. That imparts a level of trust to the team, and it tells people on a almost subliminal level, yeah, you're good, and we're expecting a lot from you. The second piece is these owners and these leaders seek new information. They seek new approaches and improvements, and they intuitively have the courage to push the envelope. They challenge convention. They want to break new ground. Now imagine you're on a project team, and if you're the owner and you walk in and you say, yep, this is what I want. My expectation is that we're going to do things that haven't been done before, haven't been seen before, and notice how that empowers everybody in the room. And that infectious attitude, that incredible inspiration and that trust starts to drive people to say, wow, I really want to do my best for that. We've had, I could probably count on one hand the people on the client and ownership side that have really inspired me. And I'll tell you what, it energizes our entire team. It creates an atmosphere of really wanting to perform and to show off, almost like, hey, look at what we did for you. This is such a cool idea, and it is always appreciated. So third piece is these owners, these leaders, as their project visionaries, see the value of their asset as more about meeting and exceeding the expectations in the market for the guests than they are simply looking at raw costs of the asset. Yeah, there's always budgets. Yeah, there's always times. There's always quality issues. But what they do is they see a bigger vision. They start to see what the value in the long run is. And this more applies to the owners that have the philosophy of holding on to things and creating memorable things that are going to perform better financially. Well, what that does is when you look at all these pieces, and okay, so these three things alone, so how do these protect the project? Well, you're protecting it from the inside. What you've done is you've galvanized a team of people together. You've been able to pull together talent, skills, and a knowledge base that they all of a sudden become your primary lookout for problems on the horizon, things to thwart in the future, ways to document things so that they're not incomplete, ways to document things, to create budgets, to be able to develop a set of documents and a package and ultimately fabricate it so that they go through. Well, so when we have those, all right, they're engaged, they're seekers, they're visionaries. I'm going to give you two examples before we close here. One, we're going to call him Mr. Didn't Last. Well, on the project that we worked on with Mr. Didn't Last, he was very faithful. He for sure was at all the meetings, more so as a statue than anything else because he was completely mentally absent. There was no pace. There were no decisions being taken. And when they were, he either countermanded it or he said, well, we should probably talk to somebody else who was not present. Well, the end result was a project that very quickly started to spiral out of control. Disorganized, the consultants didn't know what was going on. There was no project management in place. The schedule was overrun. He eliminated the entire artwork budget altogether. So the end result is a project that was less than spectacular, shall we say. So flip side is Mr. Got It Going On. Okay, well, Mr. Got It Going On walks in the room first day of the project kickoff. He begins very, very clearly. He outlines the big three. And that's not his term. That's my term, but that's exactly what he does. He walks in. He gives the big three. He creates the hierarchy. And then he begins to empower and show people that he trusts them. He is very patient. He will let the team work out problems all on their own. And then he sits quietly watching and listening. And then he says, okay, let's challenge that. And he challenges it in a positive way. Not the intent is let's make sure we're bulletproof before we go outside of this room. And that's an amazing thing. And honestly, Mr. Got It Going On is one of the best thinkers I've ever met, and he brings out incredible performance out of the teams, out of everybody, right down to the guy that's screwing the drywall in. So when we look at those pieces, I think what we're gonna do is let's just recap. All right. So in this first part of this series on protecting your project, we've outlined your project philosophy. We want to assess the big three and then create the hierarchy. Next, you're going to understand the big three hierarchy, that it could change, issue dependent, and the owner controls it. Third piece, the big three hierarchy informs the consultant and trade choices. Let it work for you. These pieces become so integral to each other that they're workhorses, and they do a lot more than just like static pieces on a piece of paper. The other piece is establish a decision-making protocol. 100% participation by the decision makers at the right times, stakeholders as well. And if a decision maker can't be present, identify and empower an alternate decision maker. And final, that soft, touchy-feely, wonderful thing is the owner leadership and understanding the attributes that go with that. So before I get to questions, and I've had a couple of questions pop in here, I wanted to kind of recap and say a little bit about the upcoming remaining 3 pieces in this series. In May, we have part 2, which is the project definition. That is about scope, it's about schedule, delegating roles and responsibilities, the order and sequences of which things get done when, and that gets rolled into a document called the differentiation document. Fantastic tool, and we'll be talking about that. Part 3 in June, that is project budget development. That is about controls. It's about areas of influence and accountability. Who's got it and who is controlling it when. Final piece in July. That date may float because it's awfully close to a holiday, but that is part 4, the project communication and other current issues. So that's about coverage. Now, by coverage, I mean what gets recorded, what gets stated, what doesn't get stated. It's about transparency. It's about clarity of communication, and also a very important thing that I think is often overlooked or just kind of ignored, and that is intellectual property and thoughts on that. Personal experiences and how you'll be able to deal with that in a more knowledgeable state and what the risks around that are. So I'm going to roll now to the Q&A and just see what we've got. Okay, is it really not possible to have the big 3 be equally in balance? Well, okay. If the idea is to have the big 3 all in balance, that would mean that the entire triangle series there would have a dot right in the middle. But it's simply not possible. Think about it from a project scheduling standpoint. You can't have 5 number 1 things. Something always has to be the first. So it's more about deciding, okay, this job's going to be budget driven. Okay, super. Then 1 down, 2 to go. And then you fall into that. So short answer is no, it's not possible to have the big 3 all completely in balance. Now, it's possible that the hierarchy will shift, and we talked about that. So just understand that that's how you could how you can use that, the big 3 hierarchy. Question: could you clarify how ownership protects a project? Owner leadership. Well, I think we kind of talked about that. It's owner leadership is the galvanizing element. You hold the flag and carry the troops, and you lead them forward, and that leadership makes them trust you, makes them want to perform for you, and it is a symbiotic thing. It's you trust them more, they trust you more, you trust them more, and all of a sudden it keeps up leveling. So it's up in that kind of a level. Okay, here's an interesting one. We're working with a client and they are newer to the industry. There's no way that they can assign a single decision maker to the project. Any ideas for how they can streamline their group decision making? Okay. Interesting. The ability to get people to make a decision. If the team structure is such that the ownership entity is deferring to the project team for specific decisions, then I think what would best be the case is get their agreement that consultant body is going to meet with them publicly or all together in one room and present their collective, coming from the consultant side, what the risks and rewards are for those. And at that point, it is an open forum discussion. You have to have that transparency. You have to have that ability to say, okay, these things are tough. It's still, I think, still fully all be present so they can work through the issues in real time. It's very important. If they're shy, if they're reticent, if they really don't know, it's okay, because that's why you built your consultant team. That's why you built a really strong project team. That's what you rely on. Nobody does this stuff in a vacuum. These projects are complex. They take a lot of hands, and that's the best way to approach it, I think. I got one more, and I'm gonna close it off here. Can I get a copy of this presentation to share? Yes, we will be posting this on our website. All you'll have to do is sign up and you'll be able to gain access to this. So you can certainly, I would really love to have you share it with people in your company and your friends and you think that it might be valuable. To those of you that did have questions and we didn't get to, please feel free to email me and I'll get back with answers. I want to thank you all for joining, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next webcast. Thanks. Take care.